Differentiate, differentiate, differentiate. This mantra is repeatedly drilled into pre-service and beginning teachers. But what if one of the primary ways we are differentiating our lessons was based on misguided, unproven assumptions? One of the most pervasive myths in our society is the learning style theory, and it is upon its foundations that many teachers base the required differentiation in their lesson plans. However, according to Anderson in 2015, for over a century it has been considered common knowledge that different people learn best when the teaching matches their personal learning style. This learning theory has appeared repeatedly in both everyday conversation and professional journals. Despite the fact that studies across the decades have consistently failed to provide evidence which supports this learning styles theory, it has thoroughly embedded itself into our preconceived ideas about learning and education. In his 2008 video presentation, Daniel Willingham of the University of Virginia uses cognitive psychology to explain how the research has failed to back up the learning styles myth as the public interprets it. The primary assumption of the learning styles theory is that if you teach students according to their individual learning styles, they will learn better. Although many different learning styles have been suggested over the years, the primary set used in educational conversations is the auditory, visual, kinesthetic paradigm. However, as Willingham says, the brain doesn't work that way. The brain does store information in visual, auditory, and kinesthetic ways. Some people are better at storing information in one of these ways. However, if the learning styles theory was true, it would predict that individual learners learn information better when it is presented in their preferred way. This is a misconstruction of the actual cognitive science behind the theory, and it has not been proven in recent studies. Most of what people are expected to learn at school is meaning-based, rather than auditory, visual, or kinesthetic-based. An auditory-based skill would be asking students to discriminate between two sounds, not necessarily to connect those sounds to the meaning they are attempting to learn. The same principle applies to the other two learning styles. There are some skills that specifically require visual, auditory, or kinesthetic learnings. For these, all students need to have the information presented in the most appropriate way, not just those who are better at processing one type of information. For example, if students are trying to learn what a country looks like on a map, the most effective way to teach this is by presenting a visual image of a map. Even for students with above-average auditory processing skills, simply listening to a description of what the country looks like would not be the most effective way for the student to learn how to locate the country on a map. Similarly, a music teacher trying to teach students to recognize the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony would be more likely to succeed by playing a recording of the symphony rather than asking students to read a description of melodic motifs found in the symphony. Simply put, the teacher should choose the best learning and teaching method for the subject matter at hand, rather than trying to differentiate for each student in each lesson. In the words of Willingham, good teaching is good teaching, and teachers don't need to adjust their teaching to individual students' learning styles. Let's take a minute to examine that loaded statement and its application for teachers. If it is correct, it seems to go against what many of us assume. Valuable lesson planning time is spent trying to differentiate parts of teaching to meet the needs of a few students who have been labeled as either visual, auditory, or kinesthetic learners. However, if what Willingham, Anderson, and others have asserted is true, this may not be necessary. If we can eliminate this myth from our thinking and teaching, teachers could use this time instead to develop high-quality lessons for all learners. Like most myths, there is some truth behind the learning styles myth. According to Scooter Raleigh, in 2015, evidence that suggests that teachers achieve the best educational outcomes when they present information in multiple sensory modes. This aligns with Carey's 2014 research on perceptual discrimination. He cites the Gibsons as saying, perhaps all knowledge comes through the senses in an even simpler way than John Locke was able to conceive, by way of variations, shadings, and subtleties of energy. In other words, the brain is using all senses available to perceive the surrounding environment in order to learn by discrimination. Eleanor Gibson also wrote of perceptual learning that it is not a passive absorption but an active process, in the sense that exploring and searching for perception itself is active. We do not just see, but we look. We do not just hear, we listen. Perceptual learning and discrimination tasks can involve multiple senses and can be implemented by teachers to engage learners with multiple senses at once. This method is more aligned with research than the learning styles theory. Rather than trying to change teaching to meet individual learning styles, a teacher might instead try to engage multiple senses whenever possible, because this is the best practice for all students. Multiple studies cited by Carey in 2014 demonstrated that perceptual learning increased learning. If we can rid ourselves from the trap of the learning styles myth, we can make room for this and other learning methods, such as those which have been labeled by Dunlosky, Ralston, Marsh, Nathan, and Willingham as high-utility methods in their 2013 review of literature, supporting or contradicting 10 learning methods. These techniques, labeled as high utility, were practice testing and distributed practice. Practice testing involves using pre-tests and periodic retests to activate prior knowledge and engage the brain in the new learning that is to follow. Distributed practice means spreading practice out both within a single study session and over an extended amount of time of days or even months. This increases long-term retention of new information and concepts. Dunlosky and his collaborators, as well as Carey and many others, have reported studies demonstrating the effectiveness of both practice testing and distributed practice. If teachers and students alike can let go of the misguided learning styles myth and instead turn to research-based methods, we might see a significant improvement in the way students learn.